Here's a question. How many Jewish-Roman wars were there? Leaving out general civil unrest, 5 wars were fought by Jewish rebels against the Roman Empire. But, as I was very sternly informed after trying to change a certain Wikipedia info box, only the first 3 of these conflicts are known canonically as the Jewish-Roman Wars. One war you've definitely heard of, one war you might have heard of, and one you definitely haven't. This video is about that war. When we last left off, the temple had been destroyed, Jerusalem was in ruins, the Great Sanhedrin had lost all of its civil authority, and tens of thousands of Jewish prisoners were sold into slavery, mainly in Italy and Upper Germania, better known as Ashkenaz. To add insult to injury, Pompeii was destroyed, taking a large, prosperous, and free Jewish community with it, and anti-Semitism was becoming ever more mainstream across the Roman Empire. Altogether, this sounds like a pretty low point for the Jewish people. And from a standpoint of pure political power, it was. But in a lot of places, the Jews were thriving. Almost half still lived in Judea, where they remained the ethnic majority. Despite the violence of the previous decades, Alexandria still had the largest Jewish population of any city in the world, which in turn had spun off similarly huge communities in Cyprus and Cyrenaica, where they constituted as much as a third of the population. But wait, there's more! Because at this point, we need to acknowledge that Persia exists. Some million Jews lived in the Parthian Empire at this point, mostly in Mesopotamia where they were the majority in several cities. Babylon, with its yeshivot and independent rabbinical court, was the most famous, but there were others. In fact, for a whole 15 years, 2 Jewish brothers, Anilai and Asinai, were allowed to govern a semi-independent Jewish city-state in Ardea, practically next door to the Parthian capital. Fast forward to the 110s. Rome and Parthia had fought each other several times, dating back to the era of Julius Caesar, and neither had ever been able to score a complete victory, so it became preferable to just avoid each other. To that effect, they continued to keep a cluster of allied but semi-independent city-states along what would otherwise be their border, the largest of which was Armenia, which was a Roman vassal but had a Parthian king. This was part of a deal that the 2 empires had worked out decades earlier to end their previous war, but it also kinda made the next war inevitable. In 110, the king of Armenia died and the Parthians installed his replacement without consulting the Romans. The ensuing diplomatic dispute lasted 4 years, until the Roman Emperor Trajan decided to fix the problem himself by invading Armenia and then Mesopotamia. Sounds pretty good for the Romans, right? Wrong. In order to take Mesopotamia, Trajan had required 10 legions, or about 50,000 men. That was a third of the Roman army at that time, and most of the legions in the east. Even then, it wasn't really enough, as the Romans ultimately failed to capture the city of Hatra. To make matters worse, a severe recruiting shortage had prevented Trajan from being able to create new legions to fill the gaps. And finally, Parthian insurgents began attacking the Romans from behind, soon joined by Mesopotamia's Jews. So to recap, 10 Roman legions were trapped behind enemy lines in what is now Kuwait, no reinforcements were coming, the Eastern Empire was severely underdefended, and word was spreading westward of a Jewish resistance movement on the front lines. What would you do? If you're Emperor Trajan, you declare victory, proclaim Mesopotamia and Assyria as Roman provinces, nominally expanding the Roman Empire to its greatest ever extent, pack your bags, head home, and then realize you can't head home because you're surrounded. Oh. But if you're Andreas, a Jew of the Davidic line in the city of Cyrene, the answer is to kill everybody. Almost as soon as Trajan's Parthian campaign began, Andreas proclaimed himself Messiah and led a brutal campaign to take the province of Cyrenaica. Now, all of the surviving sources about what happened at Cyrenaica were written by people born long after the events took place, and are pretty untrustworthy, as they portray the Jews committing cannibalism, vivisection, and human sacrifice, and why that is the historical record will be a story for the next episode, but for now suffice it to say that stereotyping Jews as depraved sadists with a taste for human flesh was rapidly becoming a Greco-Roman tradition. What is known is that Andreas's army killed so many civilians that the entire province had to be repopulated after the war. Nearly the same thing happened in Cyprus, where a Jewish rebel named Artemion nearly wiped out the Gentile population of the island. Back in Mesopotamia, Trajan had managed to break through the rebellion and return westward. His health rapidly deteriorating, the emperor entrusted the elimination of the Jewish threat to the general Lucius Quietus, known in Greek as Kitos, who in return for his service was made governor of Judea. But the campaign pretty quickly fell apart. Trajan died on the way back to Rome, and his successor Hadrian made a deal with the Parthians to withdraw. The Romans got some minor territorial concessions, but now had to deal with the Jewish uprising, which by this time threatened to conquer Egypt. Egypt was the wealthiest and most strategically valuable province in the empire, and by 117, Andreas had captured most of it. But that autumn, a fresh Roman legion arrived under the leadership of Marcius Turbo, who brought the Jewish campaign to a stalemate. Expecting the Egyptian front to collapse, Andreas and his 2 lieutenants fled to Judea, where they received the protection of Gamliel II, Nasi of the Great Sanhedrin. But Quietus soon cornered them in the city of Lydda and ultimately defeated them. That was the end of the Kitos War. Andreas and his lieutenants were executed, and Gamliel II died soon after. Quietus was assassinated, likely on the orders of Hadrian, and basically everyone tried to put the whole incident behind them. And can you blame them? The Kitos War was a directionless bloodbath, a terroristic phenomenon that engulfed the Jewish nation at its darkest moment yet. But it is significant in one deeply strange way. Hadrian inherited an empire that had shot itself in the gut. He knew he couldn't keep fighting the Jews at that moment and just wanted it to be over. So he split the difference, both placating and punishing the Jews in the most extreme way possible. First, he banned Jews from ever setting foot in Cyprus or Cyrenaica on penalty of death. Then, in one of the strangest examples of ethnic cleansing I'm aware of, he then expelled the Jewish communities of those provinces to their ancestral homeland, thus helping to make up for the loss of population there during the First Jewish-Roman War. And then he made a decision that would trouble him for the rest of his reign. He was going to rebuild Jerusalem. Rebuild the Jewish temple. In his book, Jerusalem the Biography, Simon Sebag Montefiore calls Hadrian a remarkable emperor, one of the makers of Jerusalem, and one of the supreme monsters of Jewish history. Special thanks to my patrons, including Geonim level patrons Lev Cham and Vicky Nelson. If you like this and want to support the channel, you too can become a patron on Patreon, linked in the description below. You can also find links to my sources for this video in the description, as well as a link to my book, An Armada of Cats Travels in Israel. Otherwise, you can always like, share, and subscribe. I will see you next time. And that's why this map is a lie.